Summer is upon us. Do you want to stay cool and dry at night? Try bamboo sheets from CozyEarth.com. Not only do you get a good night's sleep and stay cool and dry, but also you get to save 21% off just by using our code at checkout. InfoGo. And they have a 100-night sleep trial, so it's a win-win. If you don't like them, send them back, but I promise you'll fall in love with them. And while you're over there, check out their socks. They have a whole line of apparel. And that's CozyEarth.com. Use our code InfoGo at checkout to save 21% off. Welcome to the podcast. I'm William.
And I'm Kat,
And that makes this Info on the Go.
feeding your curiosity wherever you go.
Absolutely. Have you ever heard of monkeys that drink alcohol?
Is this some weird science experiment?
Maybe. What about monkeys that binge drink?
So why do we have monkeys that have a drinking problem?
Okay. So, the title of this episode is The Drinking Monkeys of St. Kitts, when monkeys started drinking like humans. All right, let's set the scene here. All right. So, the bar thieves of the Caribbean. Picture yourself on a tropical Caribbean beach. The sun's it's hanging over you. The water is crystal blue. It is so beautiful, by the way. Palm trees sway in the warm breeze, and somewhere nearby, a steel drum band. Well, it provides the soundtrack to a perfect afternoon. You found a really good spot, beachside bar, and the waiter has just delivered a colorful little frozen cocktail topped with some kind of fruit and a tiny little paper umbrella that really serves no purpose. And
They're
then,
just cute and adorable. Okay.
yeah, well, yeah, and then you have to take it out so you can really drink the drink.
Well,
And
and then you can play with it.
true, because some of them actually work like little umbrellas.
Those are my favorite.
Yeah. But with everything's looking great, like it's postcard perfect, right? But then
Yeah.
you look away.
Maybe you're watching a boat pass along. Maybe you're reaching for your phone. Maybe you're simply admiring the view. Whatever the reason, when you turn back towards your table, something unexpected has happened. A monkey is drinking your cocktail. Not a pet, not a trained animal, a wild monkey. The small primate sits confidently in your chair, as though it belongs there. One hand grips the glass while taking a long sip of the fruity drink, then another, and another. The monkey doesn't seem confused by the alcohol. It doesn't recoil from the taste. In fact, it appears remarkably comfortable with the entire situation.
Yeah. And the people around you, well, they bust into laughter. Cameras, well, they appear instantly because you're going to do the touristy thing and snap some little photos because it seems funny, right? That these furry little friends are alcohol thieves. Yet the monkeys remain perfectly calm, casually enjoying its stolen beverage as if it's really done this a couple of 100,000 times. And on the Caribbean island of St. Kitts, stories like these, well, they're very common.
For years, visitors have shared tales of mischievous monkeys raiding tables, stealing fruit, snatching snacks, and occasionally helping themselves to alcoholic drinks. The animals became local celebrities, known for their intelligence, boldness, and uncanny ability to spot an unattended cocktail from remarkable distances. To most people, these stories sounded like little more than amusing vacation anecdotes, the kind of tale you tell friends when you return home from a tropical getaway. But some scientists saw something more.
Yeah, because these stories raised an unusual question. Why would a wild monkey choose to drink alcohol at all? In nature, alcohol, well, it offers few obvious advantages. It can impair judgment, slow reactions, and make an animal more, well, susceptible to danger. Yet, reports from St. Kitts suggested that some monkeys seemed actively interested in alcoholic beverages. Were these simple, isolated incidents, or was there something a little more intriguing taking place?
Researchers decided to investigate, and what they discovered was far stranger than anyone expected. When given the opportunity, many of the island's vervet monkeys willingly consumed alcohol. Some sampled it occasionally, some drank moderately, some avoided it almost entirely, and a small number consumed large amounts whenever they could. The pattern was startling because it closely resembled the range of drinking behaviors seen in humans.
Humans, you say?
Very similar, it
Hmm.
seems.
And then the cocktail stealing monkeys of St. Kitts, well, they were no longer just funny island curiosities. They have become the focus of scientific research into behavior, biology, and, well, addiction. What began as observations of, monkeys, stealing adult beverages from beach bars evolved into a very serious question about why individuals respond differently to alcohol and whether some aspects of drinking behavior might have a deeper biological roots than anyone ever realized. So, Kat and I are going to dive into the drinking monkeys of St. Kitts and how these Caribbean furry little friends started stealing alcohol in the first place.
Oh, to understand the story of St. Kitts drinking monkeys, we first need to understand the island they call home. Well, St. Kitts is a small island nation located in the eastern Caribbean Sea, part of the chain of islands known as the Lesser Antilles. At first glance, it looks like the kind of tropical paradise featured on travel brochures and desktop wallpapers. Lush green mountains rise from the coastline, white sand beaches meet warm turquoise waters, rainforests blanket the interior, and volcanic peaks dominate the horizon. The island itself was formed by volcanic activity millions of years ago, leaving behind rich soils and dramatic landscapes that continue to shape life there every day.
You know, St. Kitts is where my wife pushed me off of the zip line.
Oh,
Yeah.
did you encounter some drinking monkeys?
I don't know if I did. I was probably drinking with them.
Oh,
We were
well,
living it up, man, swinging from trees and all kind of stuff. I thought I was Tarzan for a little while.
fair enough.
Despite its beauty, St. Kitts has a complex and often turbulent history. For centuries, it served as an important crossroads in the Caribbean. European powers fought fiercely, well, for control of the island because of its, well, location and agricultural potential. The fertile volcanic soil proved ideal for growing sugarcane, and by the 17th and 18th centuries, vast plantations covered much of the landscape. And sugar production became the engine of the island's economy, linking St. Kitts to a global trade networks and helping shape its culture, history, and environment. And if you know anything about sugarcane, you know it was used to make rum.
I like rum.
Mm, it's okay.
That is my, well, at this point, it's my second beverage of choice, but
I
because,
love rum cakes, real rum cakes that you get in the Caribbean.
I have not had those.
Oh, they're good. They're very, very good. They're way different than they're way different than the fruit cakes you get here in the US.
Mm,
Um, they're really good though. I mean, here's the thing. A lot of people don't like fruit cakes. I do, so therefore I love them.
right.
I thought we had this conversation in one of our holiday episodes.
I think it was the fruitcake episode.
Yeah, okay.
But St. Kitts is unusual for another reason, one that visitors often discover almost immediately. The island has an astonishing number of monkeys. In fact, estimates have often suggested that there are nearly as many monkeys as people living on the island. Imagine visiting a place where seeing a monkey is almost as common as seeing a neighbor. You could have monkeys as neighbors, it sounds
Mm.
like.
You very well could. When we were there, we did see monkeys, but we weren't drinking on the beach. We were zip lining, so,
Oh, well, give and take, I guess.
yeah.
You know, down a country road, you might spot a troop crossing a field. Walk near the edge of a forest, and you may hear rustling in the trees overhead. Sit outside a restaurant and you may notice a curious pair of eyes watching nearby vegetation, carefully evaluating whether your lunch might be worth stealing.
These animals are vervet monkeys, one of the most recognizable symbols of St. Kitts. They are relatively small primates, typically weighing between 8 to 15 pounds, somewhere in there. Their fur is mostly gray or olive colored, while their faces are dark and framed by lighter fur. It really gives them that distinctive appearance. With expressive eyes, agile bodies, and long tails that help them balance, they move effortlessly through the trees, fields, and even populated areas by humans.
What makes vervets especially fascinating is their intelligence. They are highly social animals that live in organized groups known as troops. Within these troops, individuals form friendships, compete for status, cooperate in raising young, and communicate through a variety of calls and behaviors. Researchers have identified alarm calls that warn fellow monkeys about specific types of predators, suggesting a surprisingly sophisticated level of communication. They're observant, curious, and remarkably good at learning from experience, traits that have helped them thrive in a wide variety of environments.
So, and that adaptability appears to be their greatest strength because these vervet monkeys can survive in forest, grasslands, agricultural areas, and even near human settlements. They quickly learn where food can be found, and they're not shy about taking advantage of any opportunities either. Farmers have long viewed them as crop raiders because of their tendency to help themselves to fruits, vegetables, and sugarcane. Tourists, meanwhile, they see these vervet monkeys as charming, maybe even the mascot of the island. The same cleverness that frustrates farmers, visitors or tourists often see it as a very different thing because they find it inviting.
Today, the vervet monkey is so closely associated with St. Kitts that many people assume it's always been part of the island's natural landscape. They appear on postcards and tourism advertisements and in countless vacation photographs. For many visitors, seeing a monkey is just as memorable as seeing the beaches or the mountains. But here's a twist to the story: the vervet monkeys are not native to St. Kitts. They did not evolve there. They're not part of the island's original wildlife, and long before tourists arrived with cameras and frozen cocktails, the ancestors of these monkeys lived thousands of miles away on an entirely different continent. To discover how they reached this tiny Caribbean island, we have to travel back centuries to an era of sailing ships, colonial empires, and one of the most significant movements of people, goods, and animals in human history.
So, to really understand how St. Kitts became an island filled with monkeys, we really need to go back more than 300 years ago to the height of the colonial era. So, the Caribbean of the 1600s and 1700s, well, it was a region in constant motion. European empires were expanding rapidly, establishing colonies across the Americas and competing for wealth and influence. Ships crossed the Atlantic Ocean in endless streams carrying goods, supplies, livestock, and people between continents. Sugar, tobacco, cotton, and other valuable commodities, well, they flowed toward Europe, while manufactured goods and settlers traveled in the opposite direction. The Caribbean sat at the center of this vast and often brutal system of global trade.
Among the many routes that connected the Old World and the New World were the routes linking West Africa to the Caribbean. These voyages transported millions of enslaved Africans across the Atlantic in one of history's greatest human tragedies. Along with people and cargo, ships occasionally carried animals as well. Some were intended as food during long voyages, others were brought as curiosities, status symbols, or exotic pets for wealthy colonists. Most historians believe that this is how the ancestors of St. Kitts vervet monkeys arrived in the Caribbean.
So the vervet monkeys, well, they're native to parts of West Africa, and it's likely they were brought aboard ships sometime during the colonial period. Their exact arrival, well, it really does still remain a mystery. There is no single document that records the first monkey stepping onto the island. Instead, researchers have, well, they've pieced together the story from historical records. geography, and the monkeys themselves. The most widely accepted theory is the vervet monkeys were transported across the Atlantic as well an exotic animal and eventually found their way to St. Kitts. What happened next? Well, was something no one could have ever predicted.
Some of the monkeys may have escaped captivity. Others may have been intentionally released. Once free, they encountered an environment that proved surprisingly favorable. The island's warm climate resembled conditions in parts of their native African habitat. Food was abundant. Forests provided shelter, and agricultural fields offered an endless buffet of fruits, vegetables, and sugarcane.
A buffet, you say?
A buffet, indeed. Golden corral, if you will, for
Oh,
these monkeys.
can't do it. Sorry. Nope, not doing a buffet. Mm-mm.
I know you can't.
I really
I,
can't.
I'm sure you like about want to go in there with gloves and watch them put it on the table just so you can get the first scoop, and that's it. He says,
Uh,
"No, don't do
yeah.
it."
Don't, no, no buffets, no buffets. But more importantly, there was very few natural predators to the vervet monkeys. In Africa, well, the vervet monkeys evolved alongside numerous threats, including large cats, large snakes, birds of prey. But on St. Kitts, well, there was not really a whole lot of danger that existed to them. So they found themselves in an environment where survival was considerably easier than it was for their ancestors. And so they thrived.
And generation after generation, the monkey population grew. Small groups became larger troops, troops expanded into new territories, and as decades turned into centuries, the descendants of those original arrivals spread across much of the island. By the modern era, their numbers had exploded into the tens of thousands.
Tens of thousands?
That sounds like an infestation.
Hmm. The monkeys became so successful that they eventually created a unique challenge for the people of St. Kitts.
Farmers often viewed them as troublemakers. A troop of hungry vervets could move through a field with astonishing efficiency, helping themselves to crops and leaving damaged plants behind. Fruits, vegetables, and sugarcane were all fair game. To many agricultural workers, the monkeys were not charming island mascots. They were furry raiders capable of causing real economic losses.
Furry raiders, you say? But tourists, on the other hand, they saw the situation very differently because visitors arriving from around the world were often delighted by the sight of the monkeys roaming freely through tropical landscapes. The animals became one of St. Kitts' most famous attractions. Travelers eagerly photographed them, shared stories about encounters with the monkeys, and laughed at tales of their mischievous behavior. A monkey stealing a snack from an unsuspecting visitor, well, it became the kind of vacation story people loved to tell once they returned home.
But while farmers saw pests and tourists saw entertainment, scientists saw something entirely different. They saw an opportunity. Here was a large, established population of intelligent primates living in a unique environment. The monkeys were close enough to humans biologically to offer valuable insight into behavior. Yet they existed outside the controlled conditions of a laboratory. Researchers studying animal behavior, genetics, social structure, and health suddenly had access to a remarkable natural population.
And what began as an accidental introduction centuries earlier, well, it created something extraordinary, a living scientific resource unlike almost any other in the Caribbean. And before long, some researchers would notice a particular behavior among these monkeys, one that would transform them from an ecological curiosity into the subjects of a fascinating scientific mystery. The monkeys, well, it seemed had developed a taste for something unexpected: alcohol.
Long before scientists arrived with notebooks, research grants, and carefully designed experiments, the story of St. Kitts drinking monkeys existed as little more than island folklore. And like many legends, it began with observations that seemed almost too strange to be true.
For centuries, sugar production dominated life on St. Kitts. Vast fields of sugar cane, well, it stretched across the landscape, covering hillsides and valleys in neat little rows of towering green stalks. The island's economy, well, it really did revolve around sugar. Generations of workers planted it, harvested it, processed it, and shipped it across the world. Wherever sugar cane grew, the island's monkey population was never really that far away from it.
The vervets quickly discovered that sugarcane was one of the sweetest and most rewarding foods available. Troops of monkeys would venture into fields, snapping off stalks and chewing through the fibrous outer layers to reach the sugary juice inside. Farmers often found evidence of these raids scattered throughout their crops, and the monkeys seemed particularly drawn to the ripest cane, the stalks packed with the highest concentrations of sugar.
At first, this wasn't surprising. Most animals, well, they're naturally attracted to sweet foods because sugar represents a valuable source of energy. But over time, workers, well, they began reporting something a little stranger. Some of the cane wasn't just sweet, it was fermenting. You heard me right, fermenting.
And under the right conditions, naturally occurring yeast can begin breaking down sugars, producing small amounts of alcohol. Overripe fruit can ferment. Damaged sugar cane can ferment. And anywhere sugar and microorganisms meet, fermentation can occur. Workers occasionally noticed monkeys feeding on these fermented plants and behaving in unusual ways afterward.
In other words, they were intoxicated. Stories began circulating around the island. People claimed they had seen monkeys staggering through fields. Others swore they had watched monkeys become, well, unusually bold, noisy, or clumsy. Some described monkeys appearing sleepy or disoriented after feeding on overripe fruit or sugar cane. And the tales grew with, well, each retelling. Before long, the island, well, it had a new legend.
The monkeys, people said, were getting drunk. As the years passed, the stories expanded beyond the sugar fields. Tales emerged of monkeys stealing rum drinks from workers, and others supposedly raided outdoor gatherings, helping themselves to unattended alcoholic beverages. Every island seemed to have someone who knew someone who had seen a monkey acting suspiciously intoxicated,
So somebody knew a friend that knew a friend that knew a friend.
and a lot of these.
So these stories, well, they were entertaining, but not everyone really believed them. After all, island folklore, well, it has a way of growing larger with time. A monkey acting unusually energetic one day could become a drunken monkey by the time the story was retold a couple of dozen times. Kind of like the game telephone. And visitors, well, they often heard these tales and laughed. They sounded like exactly the kind of colorful local legend that develops in, well, places with long histories and memorable wildlife.
For many years, that's where the story remained a curiosity, a joke, a collection of amusing anecdotes told to tourists over drinks at bars. But not everyone dismissed the story so easily, and some researchers began simply asking a question. What if there was at least a grain of truth hidden inside the folklore?
So the reports had persisted for decades. Independent observations seemed remarkably consistent. Again and again, people describe monkeys showing interest in sugary, fermented substances and alcoholic beverages. The animals didn't merely stumble across alcohol accidentally. According to many accounts, they actively sought it out.
And that possibility fascinated scientists. Most animals avoid alcohol or consume it only incidentally while eating fruit. But what if these monkeys actually preferred it? What if they could distinguish alcoholic beverages from non alcoholic ones? And perhaps most intriguing of all, what if individual monkeys showed different drinking preferences, just as humans do? These questions transformed a funny island legend into a legitimate scientific mystery. Could monkeys actually like alcohol? Could they choose to drink it when given the opportunity? And if they could, what might that reveal about the biology of alcohol consumption itself? The only way to find out was to move beyond stories and folklore. Scientists would need evidence, they would need experiments, and what they discovered would surprise almost everyone.
And I say before we get into the experiments, I say let's take a small break and get some rum and coke.
Sounds good.
Oh, you're for the coke. Okay, we'll be right back.
I am.
So now that we're back, as promised,
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
I came across Big Fork brands recently, and it's become one of those finds you actually want to tell people about, and you don't find that often. Okay. They're doing bacon sausage, plus these really solid pork jerky snacks and Chicago style sauces. Basically, upgrade anything you throw them on burgers, hot dogs, fries, throw it on there. It works.
But I bet it's packed full of junk.
Actually, it's made with clean ingredients and real care. That's small batch with no shortcuts, and people are obsessed with the flavor. You can go over to bigforkbrands.com, use our code INFOGO at checkout, and get 20% off anything on the site.
You can find the link and our code in the show notes. The experiments begin. The stories, they were intriguing. The folklore was entertaining, but scientists knew that stories alone could not answer the questions they were asking. If the monkeys of St. Kitts truly had an interest in alcohol, researchers needed a way to, well, separate fact from legend. They needed controlled observations. They needed measurable results. Most importantly, they needed to know whether the monkeys were consuming alcohol by accident or if they were actively seeking it out.
So, researchers designed experiments that would allow the animals to make their own decisions. The basic idea was surprisingly straightforward. Scientists offered the vervet monkeys sweet beverages that contained alcohol and observed how the animals responded. The sweetness was important because, just like humans, vervet monkeys naturally enjoy sugary foods and drinks. By creating beverages that were attractive to the monkeys while containing varying levels of alcohol, researchers could watch what happened when the animals were given a choice.
And what they discovered quickly caught their attention. The monkeys didn't avoid the alcohol. In fact, many of them willfully sought it out to consume it. Again and again, researchers observed monkeys choosing alcoholic beverages and drinking them, well, voluntarily. This wasn't a case of animals accidentally ingesting fermented fruit or alcohol. The monkeys appeared to actively seek out drinks containing alcohol. And for scientists, this was the first major surprise. The old island stories, well, they started to seem a lot more believable.
But the biggest surprise was still to come. As researchers collected more data, they noticed something fascinating. The monkeys were not all behaving the same way. Some monkeys sampled the drinks but showed little interest in consuming very much. They might take a few sips and then move on. Others drank occasionally and appeared to enjoy the beverages without becoming excessive in their consumption. Then there were the regular drinkers.
These monkeys consistently consumed alcohol when it was available, yet generally stayed within, moderate levels. They behave much like social drinkers among humans, interested in alcohol, but really not obsessed with it. Then there was another group.
A smaller number of monkeys consumed significantly more alcohol than the rest. Whenever alcoholic beverages became available, these animals often drank heavily and repeatedly. Some seemed far more motivated to obtain alcohol than their peers. And researchers began identifying patterns that looked remarkably similar to what humans would describe as binge drinking behavior.
And the finding? Well, it was startling. Here was a population of wild primates displaying a range of drinking behaviors that looked surprisingly familiar. Some abstained, some drank lightly, some drank moderately, and some drank heavily. The distribution, well, it appeared to mirror patterns commonly observed in human populations. And the more researchers examined the data, the more intriguing the similarities really became.
For decades, scientists had debated an important question that about alcohol use. How much drinking behavior is shaped by culture, environment, and personal experience? And how much might be influenced by biology? Human drinking habits are incredibly complex. There's family history, social norms, economic conditions, personal experiences, and the psychological factor of all plays important roles. Yet the monkeys of St. Kitts lacked many of the cultural influences that affect human behavior. They weren't watching alcohol advertisements, they weren't experiencing peer pressure at parties, they weren't dealing with social expectations surrounding drinking.
And yet, differences still emerged. Some monkeys seemed naturally inclined toward alcohol, while others appeared far less interested. And this observation led researchers to ask bigger questions that, well, they had originally imagined. Could biological factors influence alcohol preference long before culture enters the picture? And could certain individuals be genetically predisposed to consume more alcohol than others? And perhaps most proactive of all, could some of the mechanisms involved in alcohol use and addiction have evolutionary roots stretching back millions of years?
Millions of years, huh?
Millions with an M, because we hadn't been around for B with a like billion.
Right. You
I don't even know where I was going with that.
know,
It's million with an M.
okay. Suddenly the drinking monkeys of St. Kitts were no longer just an island curiosity. They'd become a valuable scientific window into one of humanity's oldest and most complicated relationships, which is the relationship between the brain and alcohol. Now, what began as a story about mischievous monkeys stealing drinks was evolving into something far more significant. Researchers were beginning to glimpse clues about addiction itself, and those clues would lead them deeper into the mysteries of behavior, genetics, and the biological foundations of choice.
So at first glance, studying monkeys that drink alcohol might sound like one of those unusual scientific projects that will exist mostly to generate funny headlines. It's easy to imagine people hearing about the research and laughing at the image of monkeys behaving like, well, rowdy tourists on, well, a Caribbean vacation. But for the scientists involved, there was nothing silly about the questions they were asking. What fascinated the research wasn't the drinking itself, it was what the drinking might reveal about human nature.
Vervet monkeys occupy a particularly valuable place in scientific research because, despite obvious differences, they share many biological and behavioral traits with humans. Like us, they're highly social primates. They live in organized communities with friendships, rivalries, and family relationships, and even social hierarchies. They communicate with one another, learn from experience, and respond to rewards and punishments in ways that often resemble patterns seen in people.
In other words, they provide researchers with a unique opportunity to study certain aspects of behavior in a species that is both similar to us and distant from us at the same time. So the monkeys of St. Kitts, well, they were especially interesting because they lived in a natural environment rather than a traditional laboratory setting. Researchers could observe how individuals behaved within their social groups and compare those behaviors to patterns they've seen in humans.
As scientists dug deeper into the alcohol studies, their focus expanded beyond a simple question of whether monkeys linked to drink, whether monkeys liked to drink. Instead, they began investigating a much broader set of questions. Why do some individuals seek alcohol while others avoid it? Why do some consume moderate amounts while others drink heavily? What role does the brain play in those decisions? How do reward systems influence behavior? And why are some individuals more vulnerable to addiction than others? These questions sit at the center of addiction research, and they remain some of the most challenging mysteries in neuroscience.
So, when a person drinks alcohol, the effects aren't limited to taste. Alcohol interacts with complex networks inside the brain, well, that influences pleasure, motivation, decision making, and reward. These systems evolved long before humans ever brewed beer or distilled liquor, and they are part of ancient biological pathways that help animals identify rewarding experiences and encourage behaviors linked to survival.
Researchers wondered whether differences in these systems might help explain why drinking patterns vary so dramatically from one individual to another. The vervet monkeys appeared to offer a glimpse into that possibility. Some monkeys showed very little interest in alcohol despite having access to it. Others seemed willing to consume moderate amounts and then stop. A smaller group consistently consumed much more than their peers. The variation itself became one of the most important findings because the scientists were not studying morality.
Yeah, they were studying biology. They weren't asking which monkeys were making good choices and which ones were making bad ones. They weren't assigning blame. Instead, They were trying to understand why different individuals responded differently to the same opportunity. Why does one individual stop after a single drink while another, well, continues? Why some people consume alcohol occasionally without developing a problem while others struggle with dependency? Why do certain individuals appear more, vulnerable to addiction than others? These questions, well, they challenge doctors, psychologists, and neuroscientists for generations. And the monkeys, well, they could provide a definite answer.
No animal study can fully explain the complexity of human behavior. Human lives are shaped by culture, personal experiences, family influences, emotions, trauma, and countless other factors that cannot be replicated in monkey troops. But the vervets provided something extremely valuable: clues. Their behavior suggested that biological differences may influence drinking patterns long before cultures entered the picture. Even in a population that lacked human social traditions surrounding alcohol, individuals still displayed dramatically different levels of interest in consumption.
And for researchers, that observation was difficult to ignore. It hinted that some of the roots of alcohol related behavior might extend deeper than upbringing, advertising, social pressure, or personal preference alone. Biology appeared to be playing a role as well. Not the entire role, but a role. And that realization transformed the drinking monkeys of St. Kitts from an unusual scientific curiosity into something much more important. They became part of a larger effort to understand one of humanity's oldest struggles: why substance affects some people differently, while addiction develops in some individuals and not in others, and how the biology of the brain shapes choices that can influence an entire lifetime. The monkeys hadn't solved the mystery, but they did help reveal just how complicated the mystery truly is.
As fascinating as the story of the drinking monkeys of St. Kitts becomes, there is an important part of the science that cannot be ignored: the questions surrounding ethics and the limits of what this kind of research can actually tell us. Animal research has always existed in a complicated space. On one hand, it has contributed to major breakthroughs in medicine, neuroscience, and biology. On the other hand, it raises more serious concerns about the treatment and welfare of the animals involved. Scientists working in this field are constantly navigating a difficult balance: how to gain meaningful knowledge that would help humans while still respecting the well being of the animals being studied.
In the case of the St. Kitts vervet monkeys, researchers were not dealing with laboratory animals confined to cages in a controlled environment. They were studying a free-ranging population living in the wild, interacting with naturally within their environment. Even so, ethical questions remain. Anytime animals are observed or influenced for scientific purposes, well, researchers must consider whether their presence alters behavior, whether interventions cause stress, and whether the knowledge gained really justifies the methods they use to obtain it. But beyond ethics, there's another equally important issue: limitation.
No matter how closely monkeys resemble humans in some ways, they're not human beings. This distinction is critical when interpreting the results of the research. It's tempting to draw direct parallels between monkey behavior and human behavior, especially when the patterns look similar, but doing so too quickly can lead to oversimplification.
Human drinking behavior is shaped by layers of complexity that extend far beyond biology alone. Culture plays a major role: how societies view alcohol, when and where it is consumed, and what behaviors are considered acceptable. Personal history matters as well, including trauma, family dynamics, and early life experiences. Economic conditions can influence access and patterns of consumption. Social environments shape, expectations and peer pressure. Even individual psychology and personal choice contribute to the way people interact with alcohol over time.
None of these factors exist in the same way in a monkey population on the Caribbean island. And this is why scientists are so careful not to overstate what studies like this can prove. Monkeys cannot replicate the full human experience of drinking. They do not carry cultural meanings around alcohol. They don't inherit generational trauma or participate in human social rituals. They're not influenced by advertising laws or moral frameworks surrounding substance use. And because of this, animal studies cannot explain everything about human addiction or behavior. But that does not make them useless.
In fact, their value lies precisely in what they can isolate. By removing many of the social and cultural variables that shape human behavior, researchers can begin to examine the underlying biological mechanisms more clearly. They can study how the brain responds to alcohol at a fundamental level. They can observe how reward systems function. They can explore why certain individuals show greater preference of or sensitivities to substances than others. These are pieces of the puzzle that are incredibly difficult to isolate in human populations alone.
Seen in this light, the drinking monkeys of St. Kitts are not the final answer to any scientific question. They're not a model that explains human addiction in full. Instead, they're one small but valuable fragment of a much larger picture, a living reminder that behavior is shaped by both biology and environment, and that understanding something as complex as alcohol use requires looking at it from multiple angles at once. The monkeys did not provide certainty, but they did provide perspective. And in science, sometimes perspective is just as important as answers.
So today, the monkeys of St. Kitts exist in a strange space between science, tourism, and local folklore. For most visitors arriving on the island, the first encounter with a vervet monkey doesn't happen in a laboratory or a research paper. It happens on a beach, along a roadside, or near a resort where the animals move freely through human spaces as if they have every right to be there. And they do.
To a tourist, it can feel almost surreal. One moment you're walking along a warm Caribbean shoreline, taking in the ocean breeze and the sound of waves rolling in, and the next you notice a small gray figure watching you from a nearby wall or a tree branch. The monkeys are everywhere and nowhere at the same time, observing, waiting, adapting to the rhythm of human activity with a familiarity that feels almost intentional.
And over time, they become part of the island experience itself because visitors, they want to take photographs with them sitting on fences, stealing fruit, lounging in the shade, or, you know, cautionally approaching picnic areas with a mix of curiosity and confidence. And for many travelers, seeing the vervet monkey, well, it's just as memorable as seeing the beaches or the mountains. It becomes one of the most unexpected highlights people talk about long after they've returned home.
And somewhere along the way, the magic of the cocktail monkey becomes iconic. A small wild monkey holding a brightly colored drink, sometimes real, sometimes imagined, and sometimes exaggerated through storytelling, has become quite a symbol of St. Kitts in popular culture. It's a playful image, the kind that spreads easily online and gets repeated in travel stories. A reminder of a tropical place where nature and human life overlap in unusual ways.
But behind that image is something far more complex than a funny photograph. What most people never see is the long scientific history behind these animals. Decades of observation, behavioral studies, and field research have quietly been unfolding on the island. Scientists who first came interested in the local folklore and unusual drinking behavior were not chasing novelty. They were trying to understand something much deeper about primate behavior, brain chemistry, and the roots of alcohol preference.
Over time, what began as scattered stories and casual observations evolved into structured research. Questions that started with curiosity, why would a monkey drink alcohol at all? Expanded into broader investigations of social behavior, reward systems, and biological variation within a population. And yet, for most people encountering the monkeys today, none of that history is immediately visible.
They don't see the data sets, the experiments, or the decades of accumulated research for these cocktail monkeys. They see a living animal moving through a tourist environment that has slowly adapted around its presence. The science fades into the background while the spectacle comes forward. And thus, people want to see the cocktail monkeys.
Yes. Still, the two worlds are connected. Every playful encounter between a tourist and a monkey carries echoes of those earlier scientific questions. Every photograph taken, every story shared, every amused reaction to a monkey behaving in unexpectedly human like ways ties back to the same underlying mystery that first drew researchers in.
What started as a simple observation, monkeys interacting with fermented sugar cane and alcoholic drinks, grew into a research story that, well, reached far beyond a single island. It touched on questions about biology, behavior, and the shared threads between humans and other primates.
Even now, watching a small vervet monkey disappear into the trees was something it probably shouldn't have stolen. It's easy to forget how much science hides behind the moment.
You missed the opportunity. You should have called it a cocktail monkey.
Ah,
But it's a moment that once looked like nothing more than a funny vacation story.
turned out to be a window into something much deeper.
Could you see the little vervet monkeys taking the umbrella out and kind of like tossing it to the side just to get to the alcohol?
That is a funny image, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
You really need to look up YouTube. You need to really look up some YouTube videos of these monkeys stealing drinks.
That sounds awesome.
It's quite funny. It's funny till it's not because like some people are like not paying attention. They look up and like, dang, my drink is gone. But what if the monkey like only drank half of it, ran away? Yeah, no, I'm not drinking on the beach at St. Kitts. I'm sorry.
You would, at the very least, never set your cup down, which you hardly do anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I might buy the cocktail monkeys a drink and just be like, hey, can we can we
Just
just
put a
hang out?
decoy out there.
Yeah, can we just hang out and be friends?
Here, buddy.
Yeah.
I gotcha. Here's a snack.
Have you ever heard of the research of the drinking monkeys on St. Kitts?
No, but it makes sense.
Yeah, the cocktail monkeys. Maybe we missed a really good title for this episode.
Indeed.
The cocktail monkeys of St. Kitts.
Right.
Maybe we change it before it actually comes out. Anyway, that's pretty much all I've got.
Me too. If you would like to support this podcast, tell a friend and help get the word out.
If you would like to support the show, you can do so at Patreon or take advantage of some of our sponsors. You can find all of that in the show notes.
And as always, William and I want to thank you for listening.
Whether you've been with us from day one or you just tuned in, thank you.
Join the Facebook group at Info on the Go
Over there, you can get to know us.
or ask us a question.
But whatever you do, make sure you hit that follow button wherever you're listening to this podcast.
Send us some fan mail using the link in the show notes or leave a review.
Leaving that review really does help others find us. And sending us fan mail, well, Kat and I love that stuff. But you can also email us directly at,
Info on the Go podcast at gmail.com.
and all of this is in the show notes. Till next time.
Stay curious.
If your stomach's been off lately, like bloating, reflux, or just not feeling right, there's a simpler way to get back on track.
With Professor B's Digestive Aid, which is an all natural blend of pure honey and ancient apitherapy, a herb rooted in Roman tradition. You know how at least they had some things right, right? It's designed to gently support and balance your digestion.
No long ingredient list, no harsh additives, just two powerful, time tested ingredients working together. It's even the same formula used to help cancer patients manage digestive discomfort.
And right now, you can get an exclusive 10% off any product. Just use our code INFOGO at checkout.